Alright, well if your house is like mine, it doesn't matter what time of the day or night, everybody leaves these freaking lights on, and I am so tired of turning switches off and fussing on people. So a few months ago, I bought me a big old box full of these switches that'll detect if there's motion in the room, like a presence sensor. And so I've been installing these things little by little, so I got a few of them, but I'm gonna install some more here. But let me show you what they look like. Pretty neat. I got them off Amazon. I can put a link up there for you, but what they do is, like in the bathroom, and I'm downstairs, there's one of these guys right here, Jack and Jill bathroom, and when you come into it, see, it turns on. With that one's actually a three-way. It's got one over here and one over there. So a little more complicated to wire, but we'll look at these in just a minute, and we'll show how to wire one. I'll also show what the little electrons look like as they're running through here, so you can kind of get a visual on this little display that I made. Then we'll go wire one and we'll show how easy they wire up. So let's get set up in here on our little display right here. And as you can see, I hooked up some LEDs here so you can see how the little electrons flow. With a regular switch, then we'll switch it out for one of those motion detecting type. Then we'll go in there and we'll actually do one. So let's get set up here and see what we got to do to use these little switches right here. And just a little tip, the three-way one works just like a one-way one, so there's no sense in buying one-ways for like just one light switch with one light bulb. Just buy the three-ways because they'll work for a single, they'll work for a three-way, and they'll work for a four-way if you get the right kind. And I'll show you what I got here because some of them don't wire this way, but this particular one is really easy to wire. Alright, so part one, we're going to be looking at just a simple switch. So this is just like an on-off switch that runs like one light. There's one switch, one light, or one switch for multiple lights, but there's not two switches like a three-way. So we'll get to this guy in a minute because he's got 5 wires that come out. So it looks a little confusing, but it's actually pretty simple once I show you how the switch works. So you may already know this, but for the switches, you're really only interested in the black wires. The white wires that are coming in through the wiring and the ground wire or the bare copper wire, those you're just going to tie in and you're going to hook over to the little green guy that's on the switch. This is a decorator type, but it's a single pole. It's like an on-off switch. So the ground goes here, and then the black is what you're switching, but you just tie off the white wire. So I'm not an electrician, so let me start by saying if you're uncomfortable with wiring stuff, get somebody to do it for you. But once you see it, you look at it and it's pretty simple. But the main thing you got to remember about this is you don't want to get electrocuted. And the way to keep from getting electrocuted is by turning off your breaker. Now this is a breaker that sits in your main box, and you can see the power is running up to the breaker all the time because the box is always loaded. Now, when I turn the breaker on, you'll see, because what this is the black wire. I took it out of the case, and so the LEDs are following just the black wire. The other wires are inside of there. So, when I turn the breaker on, that's like the breaker in the box. I got it off right now. So when I turn it on, you'll see that the power that was coming to the breaker and stopping with the lights, now it continues on to the switch, but it stops at the switch because the switch is off. And this is just the black wire. The other ones are hooked together with wire nuts. So we're only worried about the black ones going to our switch other than a ground that grounds the case. So as you can see, with the breaker on, the power is running down here, so that connection is hot. It's going to shock you. If you turn your breaker off, that kills the power to the switch and it stops the power at the breaker. So it's really important when you're messing around with the wiring, you got to find the right breaker and you got to check and make sure that it's not powered up. Because if I put a meter, and these little meters right here are super handy, they'll detect signal. See, when it gets close to the power, it'll detect it. And this is a LED, so it's 5 volts, so it's detecting it really quick. We'll see when I go probe it over on the wall. You'll see what I'm talking about, because one of the things we got to find out is which one of these black wires is the line coming from the breaker, which one is the load going out to the light. So you can see it right here as it comes down. This is definitely the line because it's coming from the breaker. This is definitely the load because it's going to the light. But when it's all boxed up in the wall, you can't really see it. So we got to figure out which one of those is line and which one is load, because this little guy right here, you have to have it wired right or it's not going to work. One wire is for the load, one wire is for the line, and you got to get it right. So we'll be able to see that once I show with the LEDs. I'll take those off and then I'll show the regular wiring with a 110 volt, and I'll show you how to figure out which one is line and load, even for the part 2 and part 3 of the series where we're doing a three-way, where it gets complicated because these have extras. They have a common and then they have a switch. Those we'll be able to still, with this little guy right down here, we'll be able to figure out which one is line and which one is load just by using this little guy right here. I'll show you how to do it. So, if you turn your breaker on, just to show the LEDs, then the power comes in, goes to the breaker, goes down to the switch. Well, it stopped because the switch is off. But if I flip the switch, it'll continue on. And so now the power goes all the way over on the black wire and it goes to the light bulb and lights up the light bulb. So, pretty simple how it works. A three-way is much more complicated, but once you see it, you'll say, ah, that's how that thing works. Because it's not that complicated, it just is more complicated than a single wire. So let me get this LED stuff off here so you can see. Turn it off and it kills the power. Turn it off and I'm safe. I could touch all of that because there's absolutely no power as long as that breaker is off. And I would always check anyway, either with this guy just to make sure there's no power, or use a meter. You can just use a meter like this and you can check for power as well if you got one there. Alright, so let's get all this stuff off. I'm going to leave that black wire that's normally inside of this case, I'm going to leave it just like it is. I'm going to wire it up with 110, and then I'm going to show you how to figure out which one's line, which one's load, and then how to wire up that switch. Then we'll head out into one of the rooms out here and we'll actually wire one of these switches in so you can see how easy it is. Alright, so with the LEDs removed, you can't really see the power anymore, but believe me, it's still there and it'll get you. But now you got to use some tools like this little guy right here. He'll tell you whether or not there's power in these wires. So you can see right now, there's no power in the wires, no power up here, none of there. The only place you got power is the power coming into the breaker that's in your breaker box. So when I get close to it, it'll beep. Alright, so you can see there's power in the breaker because it's always there, but there's nothing down here. So I'm perfectly safe to unwire that. Now if I turn the breaker on, and like I say, I got 110 volt here, so you'll see me being careful with my fingers. Now, with the breaker on, you get power there. But you don't get any power in the bottom because the switch is turned off and there's no power to the light. But when I turn the switch on, now the light lights up. You got power on both top and bottom. So it's energized right now. To kill the whole thing, I can just kill the breaker. So, that's how it works. A lot easier to see with the LEDs, but you can see the wire is the same. And this black wire is normally inside of the case in the wall, and you can't see it. So, let's get set up and figure out how we're going to install this guy right here with all these wires. And like I say, there's no need to buy the single pole version of this. The 3-pole works fine. You can do it for this wiring as well as a 3-way, which we'll do in part 2, and part 3 we'll do a 4-way where we'll use several of these things, hook these guys in line, and then you can operate that one light bulb from several locations like you have in your house. So let's get set up and we'll take this guy off. I'll verify that there's no power on it, and then we'll wire this guy in and I'll show you just how easy it is to wire one of these guys up. Alright, so when it comes to wiring these guys up, first you got to figure out, because if you look on the back, this particular one, I really like it because they're not all wired this way. This one's wired with the regular wiring, and then it's got this wire as its signal wire. Now what's good about it is you'll see when we wire these type in 3-way, I'm going to use one of the wires as a signal wire, and it's going to work perfectly if you change every one of them out in a 3-way or a 4-way wiring system. Change them all out to this guy. It is so simple to wire. Once you see it, you'll be like, oh, that makes sense. So how we wire this guy in, being a 3-way, into a single? Well, first thing we got to do is, before we turn the power off, now I got it off right now, you can see it's not doing anything, but I got to turn it on because I got to figure out which one of the black wires is the line or the one coming from the breaker, and which one is the load or the one going to the light bulb. So, because all this is normally in the walls, you don't know where they're going. So here's how you tell which one is line and which one's load. So if I turn the breaker on, and it's powered up with the bulb up, okay, so right now with the light on, you're going to get power on the top and on the bottom. If I turn it off, now the light bulb's not lit up. The line you can't turn off because it's turned off by the breaker. So whichever one of these two lights up with this little guy, or if I used a meter, I could check the voltage and see which one of those two had voltage. But whichever one lights up, when I bring this to it, that's going to be the line. That's the one you can't change. The load you turned off, so whichever one of these is not powered, that's going to be the bulb. So we bring it up here. As you can see, the top one, of course you can see it here, but you couldn't see it in the walls. The top one is the line. The bottom one is the load because it's not lighting up because there's no power to it. So all you got to do is mark which one's line and which one's load, because it gets very important on this type switch, because you have to wire it so that the red one is the load. So that's going to go to the bulb wire. The black one is the line, or the hot, they call it. It's going to go to the hot wire, or the line wire. The white one is going to go to the white. The green one is going to go to the bears, or the ground. And this blue one we're not going to use because we're just doing a single wire. This is the one you'd use when you're doing 3 ways and 4 ways to hook them together. So all we got to do is unwire this thing. And like you say, always check to be sure. So turn this guy on. You can see I'm still powered. So if I was to get my finger on that, it's going to shock me. So I want to kill the breaker. Now I don't have any power on anything, and it's perfectly safe to take these wires loose because it's still hot up here in the breaker, but that breaker is inside a box somewhere in your house. This guy's dead with the breaker dead. So now, let's just unwire this guy, and I'll show you how easy it is. So, you would first make sure your breaker's off. Take your wires loose. So this is I already identified it, this is my line wire. Alright, so this is the one that's going to hook the line on the switch. Let me just straighten it out a little bit because I'm going to use wire nuts. So that's my line wire. This is my load. This is the one going to the light bulb. And so we'll straighten them out a little bit. Like that. Then we would disconnect our ground. And we're going to use him too, because this type system has to have a neutral and it needs a ground. So you got to make sure if you're using that type, you got a ground wire going to your switch box, or it's not going to work. So we got to get our ground loose. So now we got our old switch off. So all we got to do is just wire these wires back in. All we're going to do is wire the ground to the ground. So green to the bare. Like that right there. Alright. This one, we identified it as the line. So we got to figure out which one's line. So the red one on here is load. The black one says hot, or the line. So we have to hook him in. Right there. And that's 2 of them. So now the red one is the load. So that goes to the light bulb, which we identified as the load. Right here. And then all we got left is the white and the blue, which we're not going to use because this is a 3-way. And the reason why I say you can buy 3-ways, you can get them in bulk. So just buy a bunch of 3-ways because they'll work as singles, they'll work as 3-ways, and they'll work as 4-ways for this particular one right here. I don't know about all the rest of them, but this particular one here, the way it's wired with its blue wire, this one will work all the way across, and you can just buy a bulk of them, then you get a big old discount. So the only thing we got left is the white wire, and what it does is ties in to the wire nuts that are in the box for the switch. So we got to take that nut loose, and we're going to add that white wire in to the white wires that are running inside. And there we go. So there is our little switch wired up. We're not going to use the blue, so if you wanted to, you can take one of the wire nuts that came with it and just cap it off. and then you would shove all that back in that box. Well, we're just doing an example here, so I'm not going to shove it in the box. I'm just going to set it up here so you can see what it does. So they come with settings, and like I say, I think most all of them are this way. You can adjust how long it stays on. You can adjust if it's a vacancy or if it detects motion. You can adjust the sensitivity. So it's got a lot of adjustments on it, but this is set default at 15 seconds, and I think it just senses motion. So we're good to go. Everything's all wired up. Now we would go back to our panel box, turn our breaker back on, and it'll start sensing. So the good thing about these guys is it sensed, it blinked green, and so as it was sensing, it blinked green and it came on. If I want it to go off, like if I was closing, you know, leaving the room in here and closing it, you can always just touch it and it'll turn it off. And then it gives you enough room to get away, and then when you come back, it'll sense you and it'll come back on. If you want to change its sensing, you don't have to turn the breaker off. This would be outside, but I'll turn the breaker off because it's wiggly. So what I'm going to do is open it up. So right inside of there is the settings. So you got vacancy or occupancy right there. You got to take this little clear thing off so it can see, and then it's got its settings. So right in there is all the little switches. So now I want to come back in. It ought to sense me and it ought to turn that light. So there you go. So it sensed me after its delay, and what it does is it delays long enough that you can get out of the room. Like if I'm leaving and I hit it, it gives me long enough. It's still sensing me, but it gives me long enough to get out of the room, to get out of its range before it trips it again. So it gives you about 15 seconds or so to get out. And then when you come back in, it'll turn the light back on. So pretty simple on how to do the wiring. Now let's move the camera out to an actual switch, and I'm going to take one of these out and I'm going to replace it so you can see that although you can't see all this, I can figure out from this little guy right here which wire is line and which wire is load. Alright, so armed with our little blue guy right here, we can see that the breaker's on, the light's on. So if I'm checking these, see right there, I got power on that one, and power over here. So all of these are lit up. Now, when I find the breaker for the one I want to change, I got to be careful because it might not kill these other two. They may be on separate circuits running another light. So I got to be real careful over here. That's why I'm going to start on this side. If I was doing all three, I would kill the power to all three. That way this whole box is dead. I don't have any risk of getting anything connected wrong. But right now, you can see that with the light turned on, this one beeps and the bottom one beeps. So it doesn't tell me much, but if I turn the light off, this one no longer beeps. So that's going to be the one going to the light. That's the load, the upper one. This one still beeps. So that's the line. That's the one coming from the breaker for this switch right here. Same deal over here with it off. I don't get anything here. So that's going to be the load. Over here I get beeping. So that's going to be the line. If I turn it on, I get beeps on both, and that's because the switch is on. But with the switch off, you can tell which one is which, because the one that doesn't beep with the switch off, that's the light bulb. The one that does beep with the switch off, that's the line. Alright, so with our breaker off, our lights went off. So now, if I get in here, I don't get anything. So that confirms that it killed the power. Well, good news is that one breaker killed everyone in this box. So I don't have any fear that there's any power in here because I got the breaker turned off. Alright, so we're zoomed in here and all ready to go. So one more time, we just want to check with our little dude here. So this whole box is dead. So no worries, I got my breaker off. Now I can take the switch out and we can swap it out for one of those motion sensing ones. So all we do is take the screws out. Like I say, I'm going to switch all of these out. This one I'll show when we make the video on how to do a four-way, because this is actually part of a four-way. It's got that switch, a switch over here, and a switch over on the other side of the room. So there's two three-way switches and one four-way switch in that circuit. But the little motion sensing guys can do it as well. All right, so there is our switch. and we figured out that this one is the line and this one is the load. So all we got to do is mark them before we take them loose, and we can make sure we got the right ones. Little red mark on him just to remind me that it goes to the red wire as we wire them in. So now all we got to do, and if you wanted to, you can check it one more time. Just make sure it's dead now that you got it out of there. So we're good. Now we just want to take them loose, and we're going to wire the other one in there. We got 3 of the 4 wires right there. We're going to hook the green wire onto this one. This is the ground wire that doesn't have anything on it. We're going to hook one to this one, so let's unstretch him and cut a little off. We're going to hook our red one to this one. Let's uncurl him, cut a little bit off. But we got to find the white wire, because we got all these wires. We need a white wire. So back up inside the box here, there's a white wire that we got to hook to. So it's hiding somewhere back in there, and we just got to figure out where it's hooked to. Well, unfortunately, it's behind this one right here in this 3-way. If you were in a single box, you would just have to find the white wire, but I actually got to move this one to get it out of the way. So I got these all marked. I'll just make sure this one is nice and red so I can remember. The other ones are easy. I'm going to have to take this one loose and find that white wire. Alright, so we got everything pulled out because I'm in search of the white wires, and there they are. They were hiding way over there. I'm going to pull them back this way so I can access them. So now I can put this one back in because I can tuck that white wire over there. Let's put this one back in. And like I say, sometimes it's a benefit that you turn all the breakers off, because then I can work inside this complete box without any risk of getting shocked. So I'm going to put that one back in real quick, because I'm not ready to change it yet. We'll be doing it in one of the other videos. Now this one I'm going to leave out because I'm going to go ahead and change it as well. So we'll get it changed out, but we'll do it in a minute. So now we got our, I can get him out of the way. We got our white wire right here, and we got our power. This was coming from the breaker, so this is our line. And then we got the one we marked with red, thank goodness, because we had to move all this stuff. This is the load. So now we got all of our wires exposed, so let's start with our green. And we'll hook our green up to the ground. Now this one was double jumped, so we're going to go ahead and hook it to this. But I'm going to take this one out, so I'll clean this up. But if I was just doing this one, I would hook it to the ground right there. Since I'm going to take this one out, I'll clean up this ground that's been wired through there in series. So now we got the black one. So the black one was the line. And so we have our line right here. So we're just wiring out that one together. And then our red one was the one we marked up here for load. This is what goes to the light. So we're wiring out that one together. The blue one we're not going to use because this is a 3-way, but we're not going to use its communication wire because we're only using it as a 1-way. So all we got left is the little white. And so we just got to take the wire nut loose very carefully so it doesn't uncurl them, and we're going to slip that white one in there, and then we're going to wire nut it back together. Tighten it up. So just a little tip, you can tug on the wires. You shouldn't be able to tug them out of those connectors if everything is good. And there we go. So now we're wired in. What we got to do is get everything back up in there. So I'm going to push the white ones back in. We'll get to them in a minute. This one was the switch I'm going to change out eventually, but I'll just put it back in there for right now. And as you can see, from the wall paint to here, these were the switches that were in here originally. So they haven't been moved. Now, all we got to do is tuck all of our little wires back in there very carefully. Make sure that the ground doesn't get up on any plugs. And then all we're going to do is put him back in there and tighten him up into the wall. So let me go get his screws and we'll put him in there. Then we'll be ready to power him up and try him out. And before I close all this up, I'll change this one out. And then for one of the other videos, we'll change this one out. So let me go get its screws and we can screw him into the wall. And there we go. So we got him all in. And like I say, I'm going to leave him a little bit loose because this one I'm going to change out anyway because it's got the ground wire to it. I need to make all these 3 decorators. So we'll get this one swapped out with a decorator. It won't need to be a sensing type. And then this one's going to be a 3-way sensing type as well. But with it all wired in, now we can go hit our breaker again and see if it comes on and lights up our light. Alright, so with our little sensor right here, and you can see it just turned the light on. As soon as I got close to it, it registered. So now the light's on, and the guy's blinking green to let us know that it's blinking, so I can turn it off. And it turns the light off, and it gives me about 15 seconds to get away. So I can go hide around the corner for about 15 seconds, and then when I walk back into the room, it'll sense me, and it turns the light back on. So now, that light will turn itself off in about 15 seconds. If I wait around the corner again, you'll see that in about 15 seconds that light will go off, and you can adjust it for whatever you want. But now, they can no longer leave that light on, and what I'm going to do is go around and I am going to get every one of these hooked up that way. So as they walk through the rooms, the sensors will pick them up, and then when they leave the rooms, the lights will turn back off. And there it went. It turned off after I walked around the corner. So then we'll hook up every one of these guys right here to where they'll cut on and off as people walk in and out of the rooms, and they're not going to stay on like they do all the time. Like that one over there, that's part of a 3-way or 4-way system where that switch plus 2 other switches controls these up here. So I'm going to do the very same thing, and then as people walk by, they can trip all 3 of the motion sensors, but in 15 seconds, they'll all fault out. So now, I walk around the corner, and the light comes back on. Well, alrighty. Well, stay tuned for part 2, where we show the little LEDs on how to wire up a 3-way switch system. That'd be 2 switches controlling 1 light. And I'll put the little LEDs on there so you can see how that works, because that's where it gets kind of tricky. This was pretty easy. But the 3-way and the 4-ways get a little more tricky, so we're going to have some fun showing them with the little LEDs. Well, alrighty. Well, thanks for watching.